All right, in this video, we will be programming exercise 2.20 at the back of chapter 2. And this is a financial application to calculate interest. The question is thus: if you know the balance and the annual percentage interest rate, you can compute the interest rate on the next monthly payment using the following formula. Interest is equal to balance times annual interest rate divided by 1200. And so we want to write a program that reads in the balance and the annual percentage interest rate, and then it displays the interest for the next month. And so they give us an example that says if the interest rate is 3% and the balance is $1,000, then the interest rate, or the actual interest rather, is $2.91. And so we want to go ahead and get started coding this. So first things first, we need to set up our class. So we're going to create a new class. Again, we're going to stay in the default package. We're going to call this class PE02 _20. I'm going to let Eclipse go ahead and put in that main method for me. Let's take out our comment stub because there's absolutely no purpose for that. It just reminds us to put in a comment, but I'll comment the end of my main method, and I'll comment the end of my class. And then of course I'll put in the comments that are required at the beginning, which is going to be a name, a W number, CMPS 161 in your section, and the date. And then we'll go ahead and give a description of the program. So using the requirements, we'll say this program reads in the balance and annual percentage interest rate from the user. And computes the interest rate for the next month. Or I'm sorry, not the interest, actually just not the interest rate, actually just the interest. Interest rate would not vary. That wouldn't be much of a program. All right, so let's get started. Once again, we know that we're reading in data from the user, so that means we are going to have a scanner. So we know that the first thing that we have to do outside of this class is import our scanner. And then everything else will happen inside the main method. So once we're inside the main method, we're going to have to instantiate or create a scanner object. Then we'll need to prompt the user for some input. So specifically, we'll prompt the user for the balance and the interest rate. The balance will be in dollars. And then we'll need to read that data in. We'll need to compute the monthly interest rate because they're going to enter in the annual percentage interest rate. And so we want to then take that and compute the monthly interest rate. once we have the monthly interest rate, then we're able to compute the interest. And that's exactly what they asked for. So now we're ready to display our results. And once we've done that, we're finished with the whole process, so we can close our scanner. All right, so let's get started importing the class. So that's our import statement. To import our scanner class, java.util.scanner, and then to create our scanner object, we start by saying scanner. We give it a name. We can name our scanner anything we like. I think I'll name my scanner Ruby today. Equals new scanner, open paren, system.in, close paren, and of course our statement terminator. So now our scanner named Ruby is ready to go to work and get some information for us. But before Ruby can go get that information, we've got to prompt the user and tell them what we want, what type of information we want them to provide. And so we ask them to enter the balance and annual interest rate. And once the user has done that, we're ready to go and read that in. And so we know that we're going to have to read in the balance, which is currency, so that's going to have to be a double. And similarly for the annual interest rate, we're going to allow that to be a double as well. So in case it's 3.5%, 10.25%, we need to allow for that by reading that into a double. So first we're going to read in the balance because that's the first piece of information that they're going to provide. And we're going to say double. We'll name it balance. And into that variable, that memory location we're calling balance, we're going to ask Ruby to go and get some information. And Ruby is going to go and get the next double for us. Remember that if we're reading in a double, then we have to use the method next double. If we were reading in an integer, then we would have to use next int. But again, in our case, we're reading in a decimal value, so a double. And so the method that we use, next double, must match the data type that we're reading in. The next piece of information that we're reading in, the annual interest rate, is also a double. And so we'll send Ruby to get that, ruby.nextDouble, and then semicolon because that is the end of that statement. So Ruby has now read in all of the information that we need and we're ready to do our calculations. Now the first thing that we have to notice is that we have the annual interest rate. We're computing the interest rate for that month, so we need to do that computation. And so we're going to need to change the annual interest rate into a monthly interest rate. And so I'm going to store that in a variable called monthly interest rate. And I'm going to do that computation by dividing the annual interest rate I'm going to divide annual interest rate by 1,200. But remember, the reason that I'm going to have to do a little modification here and use my decimal 1200.0, the reason that I'm using the decimal form of 1200 and not dividing it by just simply 1200 is that this is integer division, and this will assure me that I will have the result as a double. The reason I'm dividing by 1200 is there's 12 months in a year, and the interest rate was entered as a percentage, not as a decimal. And so I need to divide by 12 in order to get the monthly rate, and then I divide that by 100 as well to take that, move that decimal 2 points to the left to convert from the percentage interest rate into the decimal version. And now that I have all of the components of my interest formula, I'm ready to go ahead and compute the interest. So I'm going to store that in a variable called interest, which also needs to be a double. And that's going to be equal to the balance times the monthly interest rate. And so I now have the information that was requested. Once I have finished here, I'm ready to display the results. And I'm going to say the interest is, and then of course I want to actually display the value that is the interest, not just the word interest, so I don't need quotation marks here. I'm using that concatenation operator. But what's interesting to note is we're dealing in currency, and as we talked about before, when we deal in currency, we really don't need over, or don't want over 2 decimal places. We want to keep our answer to at most 2 decimal places. Later we're going to learn how to report exactly 2 decimal places, but for now we're going to use that little mathematical trick, if you want to call it that we learned from listing 2.8, where if you multiply a number by 100 and then divide it by 100, right, you get the same number. If you multiply a number by anything, divide it by that same number, you're gonna get the same number. But because we want 2 decimals places, we're going to multiply by 100, divide by 100. We've got to use casting as well, and so we will use integer casting. We will multiply interest by 100, cast that as an integer to preserve those 2 decimal places, and then divide by 100.0. So divide by 100.0, a double, to move that decimal back to the proper place, and that will assure us that we have at most 2 decimal places reported after the decimal. And in fact, it might even be nice when we say the interest is to include a dollar sign, let's say, before that, so that we report it as US dollars. And now it looks like our work is pretty much done, so we can send Ruby home for the day. Ruby, we're done. Your work here is done, so we say ruby.close. And there we have it. So let's run this and see if we get the anticipated answer of $2.91. So if we enter as our balance $1,000 and as our interest rate 3.5%, as shown in the book for your example run, indeed we get that the interest is $2.91, reported nicely with the dollar sign right there, and only 2 decimal places. All right, so that completes programming exercise 2.20.